Hi, good morning, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Beyond the Pink Cloud. This is your host, Dr. Alice Kirby, and today I have with me another author, Miss Clare Pooley. She started writing a blog called "Mummy Was a Secret Drinker," and then she has since published two books. One is called The Sober Diaries, and then her most recent writing project is a novel called The Authenticity Project. Thanks for being here with me today, Clare.
Thank you for having me on. I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, wonderful. And then I was wondering if you could just share a little bit of your story and about how writing seems to me like it was such a pivotal, sorry guys, a pivotal part of your sobriety and of like how you moved forward in your life. So I'd love to just hear, you tell your story a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, actually, writing was my therapy, really, in that I quit drinking nearly 5 years ago now. And I think, like many busy mums, I used to drink a glass of wine at the end of the day to sort of chill out and relax. And it was me time. And, I thought everyone else was doing exactly the same thing. And that glass of wine became 2 glasses of wine, became 3 glasses of wine. And by this time I was drinking at least a bottle of wine a day and more at weekends. So, if you added it all up, which I tried not to do very often, it was about 10 bottles of wine a week I was drinking, which had a huge impact on my sort of mental and physical health, as you know. So, I wasn't sleeping. I was 2 stone overweight. So in American money, that's about 28 pounds. I was anxious all the time. I wasn't a good mom. I was shouty and sort of and didn't have very much patience with my kids. I mean, I just generally, and I felt like my life was sort of completely stuck in a rut. If that makes sense. And so I knew I had to quit drinking, and I was too scared to go to AA or even to talk to anybody in real life about what was going on in my life, because I was really embarrassed and I was ashamed, and I didn't think anyone would understand. And but I sort of had to talk to somebody, and I had to make myself accountable. So I thought initially I'd write a journal, and then I thought, well, this is ridiculous. This is the 21st century. Nobody writes on paper anymore. I should start a blog. And I'm a bit of a technophobe, so it took me a while to work out how to do it. And I just started up a blogger account, called it "Mummy Was a Secret Drinker." And because I was, I didn't tell, as I said, I didn't tell anyone what I was going through, and I just started writing about what I was feeling and what I was going through every day. And I did a whole load of research as well. I read every book that there was about people's drinking stories. I read the big book. I read I read whatever I could find on alcohol, and I watched all the YouTube videos, and I blogged about that too. So, whenever I found myself experiencing something like, headaches, I would do a piece about, drinking and why when you quit drinking, you start getting headaches. And, so the whole thing was sort of me exploring what I was going through. And, that picked up readers, despite the fact that I didn't publicize it at all. And, so incredibly, within the first year, I'd had about 1 million hits on the blog,
Wow.
which is extraordinary. And it was a huge support for me. And it got to the stage where, if I didn't write every day, I felt nervy. I mean, writing was my way of getting my head in place and working out what I was going through, as well as, and then it started helping other people too. So that's where it all started.
I think that speaks to how big of a problem or an issue this is for women. I'm assuming your blog readers were probably women and men, but I would assume a lot of women, that you had so many hits of just telling your story, because I imagine so many people felt the same, where, I'm in a lot of different sober communities online, and I hear a lot of people sort of echo these sentiments of like, I don't want to go to AA because I live in a small town, or I'm ashamed, or I'm afraid. And so I think people are really looking for resources like that. and to just hear your voice coming in saying like, well, this is what I'm going through and this is how I'm dealing with it. And it's so cool you did research too and like brought that into what you were writing. Just to have like another, like, here's some information that I'm finding out and bringing in. I think it's a really valuable service as well as therapy for you.
Connection. Sorry, I think I've just lost you. Are you
Oh,
there? Yeah,
I
got you.
am. We're back. We'll edit. Don't worry.
Thank you. Sorry, it was my connection was going, so I'm just trying a different Wi-Fi, which I think seems to be working better.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I had always believed that there was that alcohol issues were black and white. You were either a normal drinker or you were a rock bottom alcoholic, and and I didn't think there was anything in between, and I didn't fit into either of those camps as far as I felt at the time. I was sort of, and now I think there's much more awareness of the grey areas of drinking issues and the fact that it's very much a spectrum and not a sort of, not a black and white thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think where my blog appealed to people is all those people who knew that their drinking was becoming an issue, but didn't feel like they fitted into any of the stereotypes. And I think now things are starting to change, and there's much more awareness that the stereotypes are too simplistic.
I agree. There's so much information now about gray area drinking and just with simple things like taking like a sober October or a dry January and trying, like, let's just try sobriety for health reasons. I think that's good. I think anytime anyone can, especially if somebody who feels like there is a problem, even if it's just like a niggling little thought, which I think is how it starts for a lot of people of, maybe this really isn't serving me, or this behavior or this substance like really isn't helping me be the person I want to be. To have resources like your blog and like a lot of what we're seeing now on Instagram with the gray area drinking. It's a good time to be a sober woman. I'll say that. I think there's a lot less shame around it than I think there was probably 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Yeah, and I mean, even when I gave up, which was, relatively recently, 5 years ago, I felt that if you give up smoking, people congratulate you, and they,
Mm-hmm.
Universally tells you you're doing a great thing. And and when you give up drinking, people sort of look at you slightly strangely and think you're a bit odd, and and it makes it so much harder.
Mm-hmm.
I say in my book that alcohol is the only drug that you have to justify not taking, and it does make it makes it hard when you feel like you have to justify doing something which is wholly positive.
I love that quote too. I was trying to think of it. I forgot that was from you. It's such a good quote. It is. It's so bizarre. It's like the only drug that we're like, no, I just don't do that one. And people think there's something, like, think that there's like a problem or there's something wrong with you. Or I've had somebody ask me like, well, are you okay? And I'm like, look at me. Like, clearly I'm much more okay than I was when I was drinking.
Well, quite.
So you've been sober for a while. What do you do like these days to kind of practice your sobriety? Is it just sort of, this is big? I mean, I've been sober a little over 2 years and I feel like it's become it's pretty normal for me. So I don't know that I like think about like doing a lot of sober things. I just kind of go through my life sober. But I'm curious, since writing was this big catalyst for you, and you write about it in your book and even in the novel, you've got a character who's an addict. If you do anything in particular these days to sort of, I don't know, practice sobriety?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still very involved with all the sober communities. So, I do a lot of podcasts like this, and I'm relatively active on Instagram, and I meet up with a lot of the sort of sober influencers in real life, and I do the festivals. So, so I like to be part of that very positive sober community, because apart from anything else, it's a great community. There are some fabulous people in it, and I think ex-addicts are some of the best people there are. And actually the addict character in the Authenticity Project, who you mentioned, he's called Hazard, and I love him, because he is that addict part of me. And I think ex-addicts are some of the most interesting and complicated people that you can get to know, partly because I sort of feel like we there are two sorts of people. There's people who are good at doing things in moderation, and I was never very good at moderation. I can't moderate anything. And there are people like me who are all or nothing, and all or nothing is actually a good way to be in many ways. We're all or nothing about everything. We're all or nothing about friendship, about love, about fun, about work. And that's, I think, partly why ex-addicts are such extraordinary people.
I agree. What festivals do you go to?
Oh, there's a great festival in London, and actually I think they're moving outside London as well, called the Club Soda Mindful Drinking Festival, and it's getting bigger and bigger. They've been running it now for about 3 or 4 years, and every year it gets larger, and there are this time there were thousands of people there and lots of brands. So I think we have more alcohol-free drinks brands in the UK than you have in the US at the moment.
I think so too.
There are hundreds of alcohol-free beers and spirits, and
Wow.
all sorts of things. So it's an amazing event.
That's great to know about, because I don't think we have a ton of stuff like that here. I think it's growing, where I know there's a group called Sober Bar, and they'll go or Sands Bar, sorry, and they go around the country and do like little pop-up sober bars and sort of nightclub type events with sober cocktails or mocktails, and they'll have different vendors come in. But I love when I was drinking, I used to love big music festivals and camping and being this other like reality for a couple days. But because there is such a drinking and drug culture around those, I haven't gone back to one since I've been sober. Yeah. So I love the idea of going to a sober one and like getting to engage with people and remember things and be a part of that community. That's really great that happens over there.
Yeah, and I think the change in the drinks industry is really interesting as well, because, and I know some people find drinking sort of fake alcohol is actually a trigger and is not helpful at all. But for other people, it really helps. And I found that, at the end of the day, if I opened an alcohol-free beer, it would, my subconscious would sort of believe that this was the real thing, and it would just make me feel, more relaxed and able to sort of deal with stuff. So, it was a really helpful prop for me in the early days, having sort of mocktails or sort of alcohol-free beer. Those sort of adult alcohol-free drinks really helped.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great, and I think it is really individualistic, and if it works for some people, that's wonderful that it's there, and then if it doesn't, then drink water.
Yeah, exactly.
There's options for everybody. And so I'm curious, I read your novel. They sent me the galley and I loved it. And I was so excited to just get it like ahead of time. I felt really special. And I'm curious, because I didn't read the Sober Diaries, your first book. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about the difference in writing them, because one was more, is it fair to say that the Sober Diaries was like a little bit of an extension of your blog?
Yeah, I mean, the Sober Diaries is literally the story of my first year not drinking, and it's been described as Bridget Jones dries out
because you're British, and it's funny. I'm assuming.
And it's funny. It's not all doom and gloom, because my way of dealing with things was to use humor, and so the Sober Diaries is literally a memoir. It was my story, and I found, as I said to you before, I found writing really therapeutic. So when I finished writing that, I actually wanted to carry on writing, and the Authenticity Project in a way was also therapy, in that there are 6 different characters in it, but each of them has a sort of flaw, a central flaw, and each of those flaws are mine in a way. So, Hazard is the addict, and there's Monica, who's sort of a little bit OCD, and there's Julian, the artist, who, he's my creative side. So and Alice, who is a mummy Instagrammer, and she's sort of totally addicted to social media, which is something I have to watch, again, being an addict. And yeah, so I found, actually, funny enough, writing that novel in a way was very much like writing the Sober Diaries, in that I was, through it, I was exploring different aspects of myself in many ways.
I was going to ask you if there was one particular character that you feel like you based more around yourself, but it sounds like there's parts of you in all of them.
Yeah, I mean, there's one character who isn't anything like me, and that's Riley.
Mm-hmm.
And Riley is an Australian gardener, and he doesn't have he doesn't have a flaw. His only flaw is the fact that he's almost too perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's the only one that I feel, I don't really share anything with at all. But the story is about how each of those sort of 6 people are brought together by this little green notebook, and the notebook is called the Authenticity Project. And in it says everybody lies about their lives and what would happen if you told the truth instead. And each of the characters tells a truth about their life, and through that they all meet each other and they all change each other's lives for the better. And that really was sort of based on my own experience, in that, I found when I published the Sober Diaries, telling my story meant that people from all over the world sent me messages saying, what you telling your story really changed my life, because until now I thought I was the only person who felt like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that really gave me the idea for the book, because I thought, well, what would happen if we all told our stories, if we all, we were all open about what our lives are really like? Because, most of the time we're not. You look at somebody's Instagram feed or their Facebook feed, and it's this, very highly curated, glossy version of their real life. It's not how their life really is. And I wanted to explore, what would happen if we were really honest.
I think it's a really good question. And I almost think it's a difficult climate these days, because I feel like with social media, there is a lot of focus on like, be authentic and like share this authentic, bit about yourself, especially in the entrepreneurial world. But then so much of that feels like it's really highly curated. Like, this is the authentic person that I'm projecting to you for this specific reason. So for me personally, I just get exhausted by it sometimes, like of how to like express, I guess, a part of myself that really is very authentic, but that also is, shareable with the world. And then I read things sometimes where I just get irritated by it, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, on like this current climate of like, where everything is really supposed to be hugely authentic, but then it seems so much of the time that it's really not. It's just more curation.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a problem with social media, isn't it? In that, we are more connected than ever before with, thousands of people all over the place. And yet loads of us are actually really lonely, because we're missing those, those deep and real, in real life connections. And, that sort of fake authenticity thing is very easily done on social media. Everybody uses filters, everybody sort of, picks the things that make them look and sound the best. And, that's partly why I think, my book was set around old school technology. These people wrote in a notebook, and they met in a cafe, and, and it strips away all of that artifice that, that we use, all the time with technology these days. And I think we're really yearning that, I mean, I think my kids are really into watching old reruns of Friends. And I look at it and I think, God, that feeling of, a bunch of people meeting in a cafe, and without, without all these phones and laptops and all that sort of stuff is actually, I think, what we're all craving. And that's what my book delivers, I think, is that sort of, that feeling of real life connection.
I think so. Oh, I agree too. I think we do crave that, and we're not sure how to how to get it sometimes. I think it's becoming harder and harder because we do have this other avenue, whereas 20 years ago we didn't. It was just that, like, if we wanted friends, we had to go out and interact with them in the real world.
And it's a great thing in many ways. I mean, my blog saved my life.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't real life. That was all, that was all through technology and virtual friendships. But it was hugely helpful to me. And I write in the Sober Diaries about the fact that 8 months after I quit drinking, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So it wasn't a very good year, to be honest.
No, God, it's a lot at once. A lot.
Yeah. And I'm, my blog at that point was such a help because I get quite emotional when I talk about this, but by then I'd made these friends all over the world, and they, when I said that I'd been diagnosed with breast cancer, I had these messages from people all over the place sending, sharing their stories and sending me their wishes. And so for instance, there was a lovely lady in Minnesota who told me that she'd got her whole church congregation to pray for me, and she'd never met me, she didn't know me, and it was such a powerful thing. And so I think technology can be miraculous, but it can also, you also lose something with it, and that's really what I wanted to look at is those real life connections that we're missing.
And I think, like you said earlier, it's the moderation factor of maybe not delving so deeply into just technology, but using it because it is wonderful. I mean, I'm sure you talk about how much your blog really saved your life, but I'm sure you saved the lives of others. It sounds like you reached so many people, and I mean that's outstanding. I actually sent I was kind of looking through some of your blog stuff last night, and one of your posts came up about like never getting past the first 4 days. One of your blogs, and I've had a woman reaching out to me recently online, and we've talked a little bit about sobriety, but she's in that place, and so I've kind of given her some advice from my perspective, or just talked to her about my own experience. But I saw that post and I sent that to her last night, and I got a message from her this morning. She's like, wow, this is so helpful. This is exactly what I experienced. So it was really neat just, for me kind of just to go on and look through your stuff rather briefly to find something that I was like, oh, this is perfect for this person. And to send it and to get that response so quickly of like, wow, this really resonates. This is really helpful. Like somebody else does understand what I'm going through. I think that's just hugely potent and powerful.
Well, it's amazing, isn't it? With addiction, I believe there are sort of two life experiences that connect people, or there's probably more, but two that I'm very familiar with that can connect people all over the world from different backgrounds, different cultures, different ages. And one of them is motherhood. You find that, if you have a baby the same age as somebody else, it doesn't matter where you're from, what language you speak, how old you are, anything, you find you will have a sort of form of connection because you're going through very, very similar things. And I think the same is true of addiction. There are some things that sort of, that we just, however different we might be and however different our addictions might be in our personal circumstances, there are things that, that are just so similar across all of our experiences. So, so again, sharing stories is really helpful because, you listen to them and you think, oh my God, I thought I was the only person that did that. I mean, so to give an example, I mean, I found when I was writing my blog that I did a piece about how I used to be really embarrassed about cashiers, because I used to think when I went to go and buy alcohol, I thought that they were judging me and that they would remember how much I'd bought the day before. And so I used to rotate the shops I went to.
I think that's common. I hear that from a lot of us.
And I wrote this piece and everyone said, yeah, I do that too. And everyone was showing. And then somebody wrote saying, I am a cashier.
That's a different perspective.
I was like, oh my God, it's true. So I think those little things that that unite us all are so powerful.
I think so too. It just helps you feel like you're not alone. I know for me that was such a big thing when I first was getting sober, is to read some I think it was AA literature, but I was reading descriptions and I'm like, oh my God, I'm not crazy. I'm not a terrible person. Like this is an addiction issue. It was very, it was comforting.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
how old are your kids, Claire?
Now they are 16, 13, and 11.
Okay,
So
so they're more grown up. I was just curious how your relationship or your conversation around drinking goes with them these days and kind of what that looked like as you were getting sober, as much as you'd like to share or not share.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think the important thing to say is they are so proud of me. I mean, I think one of the best things for me about quitting drinking is how it's impacted the relationship I have with my kids. And I'm a much better mum than I was. I'm more patient. I'm more on their level. I'm not trying to. I think when I was drinking, I was constantly trying to escape my own children, which is awful. But
Mm.
that's where you'd read the bedtime story. And my eldest, when I quit, was 11, so my youngest was 6, so they were a bit younger. And I'd be doing bedtime stories, and I'd be skipping through to the end as quickly as I could because I wanted to go and pour myself a drink. And and they're young for such a short period of time, and it's so sad to feel that you're spending so much of that time trying to escape. And yeah, so I'm a lot more present now, and I think I set. I also believe I'm setting a much better example. And my husband still drinks, but he drinks moderately. Curse him.
I know my boyfriend's the same way. I don't understand it.
So I mean, I'm hoping that between us we set a good example in that he shows them, what drinking sensibly looks like, and I show them that life is perfectly doable and in fact quite brilliant without any alcohol at all, and then they can choose which way they go. Um, whereas I think what what I was teaching them before, because kids learn not just from what you say, they learn from what you do. In fact, they learn a lot more from what you do than what you say. And what I was teaching my kids is that it's impossible to get through life without constantly having a glass of alcohol in your hand. And that is not a good lesson, I don't think. So yeah, I think I'm a better role model now. So
I'm sure. I'm sure you're just, if nothing else, you're like a million times more present without the alcohol.
yeah, exactly.
Do they ask you at all about like drinking? Or I know you said your oldest is 16. So I know that's the age for a lot of kids where drinking starts to become a thing that they might want to try or do. I don't know if any of those conversations have come up.
Yeah, and what I generally say to my kids and to other teenagers who ask me about drinking is, I don't think you can tell teenagers not to drink, because it is so, it's around them, it's that completely surrounds them, and we all know, we all went through the phase of wanting to try everything, and I think it's impossible to turn around and say they can't do it. Anyway, you can't tell kids not to do something because they don't pay any attention.
Especially teenagers. Yeah.
But what I do say is just, I mean, start with, I've told my kids that alcohol issues can be genetic, and that they particularly need to be quite wary. And my eldest says that whenever she is pressured by friends to do something she doesn't want to do, she says, look, my mother's an addict and it can be hereditary, and therefore I'm not interested. And she says that immediately shuts down the conversation. And actually really respectful of that. So I like the fact that I've given her that excuse to sort of avoid the peer pressure.
Absolutely.
But yes, but what I tend to give them is 3 rules, and I sort of say, if you're going to drink, try not to drink more than 3 days a week. Try not to drink more than 3 drinks at one time, and never drink alone. And I think if you can stick to those rules throughout your life, you probably won't get into any trouble. But if you start finding those rules are impossible to stick to, then put your hand up and ask for help. So. And it's funny because you tell that to a 16-year-old and they go, yeah, that's perfectly reasonable. Of course I'd never drink more than 3 nights a week. Of course I'd never drink more than 3 drinks at a time. And I'd never drink by myself. And you say, look, remember how reasonable you think those rules are, because there will come a time, quite possibly, when you start thinking, oh, those rules are silly. And of course it's so. break one, two, or three of them, so I think remembering the rules throughout your life is a helpful thing.
Absolutely. And that's nice and simple and easy to remember, which I think helps.
Mm-hmm.
I
But let's
like it.
see if I manage
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. If you can, I know just hearing them, I'm like, that's impossible.
Well, it was
Why?
impossible for me, but that was why I had to quit.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and so I'm curious about just your approach to writing. If you like what your writing schedule was like for both your memoir and for the Authenticity Project. If you kind of got up and wrote at the same time every day, if you set goals for yourself about how much you were going to write every day or during the week, or if you would just kind of fit in writing around other things, or like what your writing process itself was actually like, what approach you took.
You know what? I mean, I'm sure you found this as well, but when I quit drinking, I had so much more time available, and I found that the first year of not drinking was very much about looking inwardly and doing, working out who I was, what I was, what I was going through, all those things. And then after that, it became about looking outwardly and working out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And, and all sorts of, everything has changed since then. And one of the key things is that when I was drinking, I used to hate mornings and love evenings. And when I stopped drinking, I started going to bed much earlier, and I wake up, really, really early, feeling fabulous. And I still, even 5 years down the line, I still feel grateful about waking up without a hangover. And so to answer your question, I write first thing in the morning. I wake up at 5 a.m. and I write for the first 3 hours of the day. And that's the time when I feel most sort of alert, most creative, I'm more able to think laterally, and the day hasn't sort of started getting in the way, if that makes sense.
It does.
And then I take the kids to school, I do some of the chores, and then I go back and edit. So I do all my original writing first thing in the morning, and then later on in the day I just do editing and admin and the sort of the less creative stuff. So yeah, 5 a.m. is my tip.
That's what
Which
I've
is,
heard from a couple of writers is first thing in the morning, get up. I think there's definitely something to that creativity before the day kind of starts
yeah,
getting it into you or getting under your skin, as you said.
there is something about being half asleep. I find that when I wake up, before I even get out of bed, I start thinking about what I'm going to write next, because when you're not, when you're half asleep, your brain thinks in a very different way. It's much more lateral, much less logical. So you come up with quite much more interesting ways of thinking, I think, at that time in the morning.
I think you're right. And I've heard that from quite a few people. I had another writer on a few weeks ago, Laura McCowan, who just released her
Oh
memoir.
yeah,
Um,
I know of her.
yeah, she was lovely. She was lovely. And I asked her because I'm curious about how people write, what's the actual process of the nuts and bolts that go into it. And I think her response was pretty similar, is like get up first thing in the morning and
Mm.
and write.
You know what the great thing about writing is if you're an addict, which is that, I think part of the reason we drink is because of that voice in our heads that, that can drive you crazy, and drinking is a way of just numbing the sort of noise and just sort of dialing everything down. And I think if you're a sort of creative person, often that chatter just becomes too much sometimes. And and this is why people talk about mindfulness and mindfulness helping. And I don't know about you, but I'm useless at meditating. Because the minute I think of something, my brain just gets filled with rubbish. And writing is a really great way of being mindful, because while you're sitting there imagining a story and writing it down, or writing about your own life, whichever you prefer to do, you are in the moment and you are quieting that voice in your head. And it does sort of, it's really beneficial. It's just a moment of calm for your brain, if that makes sense. Some people find the same with painting, or with gardening, or with knitting. Any of those sorts of activities have the same effect.
Oh, I love that, writing as a form of mindfulness and as a way, as a means to like calm the voice in your head. That makes so much sense. Did you always want to write, like before this blog project started and you were getting sober? Had that been ever a goal or an aspiration or something you were drawn to
Yeah,
before?
but I was a child, my big thing was reading and writing. And then, but when I got to my 20s, life got in the way and I stopped writing, and I didn't write again until I quit drinking. And, one of the things I found when I was, from the stories that people have told me who've read my blog and my memoir, is how common it is that the thing you're drawn to when you quit drinking is the thing you loved when you were a child.
Mm-hmm.
uh, and and I always say to people now, when you quit drinking, you're left, your life has this sort of hole in it, and you need to find something to fill the hole with. And often that something is what you loved when you were little. And so for instance, a woman wrote to me and she said that she read my blog post I'd written about this, and she said she was thinking, what did I love when I was a child? And her thing was horses. She loved horses. So she started riding again, and she said she loved it so much that she quit her job and she started up her own stables, and now it's her whole life, it's her passion, it's revolutionized her life. And and I hear those sorts of stories over and over again, people saying they refound things that they lost. And so yeah, writing was my thing that I refound.
That's lovely. And that's so nice you got back to it, and because it's already helped so many people. So it's
Yeah,
wonderful for you and for a lot of other people, which is, that's got to feel really, really good.
yeah, it does. It's I can't believe how much my life has changed. It was a few not just a few years ago I was so miserable, and now it's great.
Did you do any other like recovery or rehab type stuff aside from writing? Or it sounds like you went through sobriety. And again, as much as you're comfortable sharing, it sounds like writing really was the thing for you that helped you get sober and communicating with these other people.
Yeah, I mean, it was a combination of writing and the connection that the writing brought me. And actually there's a great TED talk, you've probably seen it, by Johann Hari, and it's called Everything You Thought You Knew About Addiction Is Wrong.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of that TED talk, he says the opposite of addiction is connection. And I think that's so true. And that's, effectively what AA does, is it sort of provides those connections. And, and for me, my blog did exactly that. And yeah, so it wasn't just the writing, it was the people I met through the writing. Because I don't think well, I'm sure you can get over addiction on your own, but it's very hard. And it helps to surround yourself with other people going through the same thing.
100%. I think it helps a ton. I have another question about the Authenticity Project. When you were creating the characters, did you have like a pretty well-formed idea of all of them, like before you started the story? Or did you have like kind of an idea of them, and then like through telling the story, their personalities emerged, or some of
Uh,
both?
well, really the latter, in that, I mean, it's funny how characters sort of grow to have their own lives. And and it started. I do find when I'm in the middle of writing another book now, so I'm working with these new characters, and it does start making you feel like you're going slightly crazy. You feel, when I remember years and years ago, I read a book about a lady who had split personalities, and I can't remember what it was called, but she was sort of 7 different people or something. And you start feeling a bit like that, because you live with these people in your head. And to answer your question, to start off with, I had a rough idea of who they were, but I got to know them better and better as I carried on writing. So by the time I got to the end of the book, I then had to go back to the beginning and then rewrite it, knowing what I now knew about them, if that makes sense.
Oh, that does make sense.
Because they develop and they change and they do things sometimes that you weren't really expecting them to do. And and you grow to sort of, and you do grow to really love them. And Hazard, for instance, without giving too much away, at one stage he falls off the wagon, and I found that really difficult to write because I was like, I'm really sorry, but
I'm rooting for you. It was kind of hard to read that part too, actually. I was like, oh no, he's doing so well.
And it's hard making your characters do things that are hard for them because, as I said, you grow very fond of them. So even the ones that aren't automatically lovable.
Mm-hmm. Did you do any formal training or any writers' workshops when you decided you wanted to kind of make the leap from memoir to novel, or was it just an idea that got born and you sort of went to work?
I did a novel writing course with a literary agency called Curtis Brown. I think Curtis Brown are in the States as well. And they do a 3-month novel writing course, and I applied to go on that, which is and it's selective. You have to submit 3,000 words of your novel, and they take 15 people, and then you share each other's work as you go through the 3 months. So part of it is sort of formal coaching, and part of it is peer review, if you like. So the 15 of us became very good friends, and we all sort of we all read each other's work, and we all critique each other's work, and we still meet. We call each other Write Club, and Write Club meet about once every month, and we still read each other's work. So it was really helpful, and I think it just gave me confidence to sort of that I wasn't completely wasting my time trying to write a novel.
I think you need that, especially that's a huge project to undertake. A novel is a lot of words.
Yeah, it's a big time investment. So I think I'm not sure I would have got to the end if I hadn't had the confidence that course gave me to think that it was going to be okay, because it's a lot of time.
Did you find that reading and critiquing some of the other work actually helped in your own writing process?
Yes, it definitely does. It's really helpful, and you find even people who are writing completely different genres and completely different styles, it just helps you to sort of look at what makes a great story, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are you where are you in the process of writing your next book right now, if you could talk about it?
Oh yeah, I'm about halfway through.
Oh wow.
A little bit more actually, but again, I write the first draft very sketchily, and then I go back, and once I've got to know the characters better, I go back and fill it all in. And it's quite weird. Well, there's a character in the novel I'm writing at the moment called Iona, who is very eccentric, and she's in her late 50s, and she's a bit of a bitch, but she's very funny, and she's I'm very fond of her. And my daughter, my youngest, said something to me this morning, and I said, "What was that, dear heart?" And I thought I just called her dear heart, which isn't what, and that's Iona. And you do get to the stage where, when you're right in the middle of that sort of creative process, where you start finding that you're becoming your characters, and sometimes you become them or they become you, and it's quite, it can make you feel like you're going slightly crazy.
Then you have to go do something, I would probably imagine, like grounding with your kids, or take a walk outside, or something to remind you of what your current reality actually is.
Yes, exactly. But that's an important process to go through, because you do have to go through that process of thinking. So so when with the Authenticity Project, so I was writing from the perspective of 6 different people. I was constantly, if I was in a restaurant, I think, okay, well, what would Julian order if he was here? What would Monica say about this? You have to get to know them over time as if they're almost part of your family. So so constantly asking yourself those questions is really, it's really helpful, and it's fun. I'd sort of think, okay, if these 2 characters had a fight, who would win? Mm-hmm. and putting your characters in those sort of situations in your head sort of helps to get to know them. Does that make sense?
It does. And I imagine that must help too with, if you do have that sort of mind chatter or busyness in your head, as we were talking about earlier, that comes with for a lot of us when we, no longer are using alcohol to tamper it down, to have this level of sort of focus and engagement and like an ongoing project to be aware of. I feel like that's probably just hugely helpful for managing stuff like anxiety or stress, because you've got things to focus on that are kind of fun and interesting.
When I came up with the original idea, it was, part of the idea was when I was going through a sort of period of insomnia. And if you can't sleep, you start worrying about stuff, and the more you worry, the less you sleep, and the less you sleep, the more you worry, and it becomes this big circle, and then you can't get out of it. And so I found writing plots in my head was a great way of not worrying about real stuff. So again, it's really therapeutic, just sort of letting your mind focus on a fantasy world stops it worrying about the real world. So, and you're absolutely right, so finding one of the keys to staying sober is finding ways of dealing with anxiety, because alcohol is such a quick way of dampening stuff down, and of course it ends up making things worse in the long run, but it is quick and easy to start off with, and you need to find other ways of doing the same thing, and for me writing is that.
It's great that you found something that works for you, and again, that's helped so many other people. It's inspiring. So is there anything that you would like to share or say with the audience before we kind of wrap up here? I like to offer people just a turn at the mic.
I think the main thing is, the main reason I wrote the Sober Diaries is because when I first quit drinking, I felt so alone, and I felt so ashamed. And, I just want to say to anybody out there who is just, is at the point of wanting to give up, or who has just given up, you are not alone, and there is no reason to feel ashamed. Alcohol is a drug, and the fact that you are addicted to an addictive drug is not your fault. That's what it does. The drug is at fault, not you. And then the other thing I would say is if you're a bit further down the line, and and you're starting to come out the other end, then tell your story. And that's really the theme of my novel, is that if you tell the truth about your life, it will change other people's lives for the better, and your own. So don't feel alone, and tell your story.
That's lovely and important. And so let's talk about your book, because the Authenticity Project comes out February 4th. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Okay. And so people should keep a lookout, and then we'll put a link. I'll get some links for your social media or anywhere that we can find you online, and I'll post those in the show notes as well, if you have a specific order link for people to grab the book.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And it's such a lovely book.
Good.
I really enjoyed reading it. I actually I'd had a snowboarding injury, and my knee was like the size of a balloon, and I couldn't walk, and I was so frustrated, and I got this book in the mail, and I was like, yes, I can just lay here and read. So it was like a nice, it was therapeutic.
Oh, good.
And thank you so much for coming on to chat with me today, Claire. I really, I admire what you've done, and I'm really happy for you and for all the people that you've been able to touch and help through your writing. It's really beautiful to see that.
You, through your podcast, well done. Thank you for asking me. I've really enjoyed chatting to you.
Yeah, likewise. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming on, Claire.